Mercy and Law rarely lived in the same house, and Celeste Stoneheart had learned that customs were often only sharpened knives with prettier handles. Pax called their rituals sacred because sacred things did not have to answer for cruelty. They called widows' vessels, heirs' assets, bloodline continuity duty. They called it order when a woman was stripped of name and choice in the same breath. Yet beneath every polished word stood a simpler truth she could no longer ignore. Power protected itself first. If she wanted her child born into anything other than a cage dressed as tradition, she would have to stop waiting for fairness and start surviving men who mistook endurance for surrender. The first time Darius Silvermane struck the council table and called her traitor, she was still kneeling in her own family hall, fingers blackened with soot from the torches that had burned through Stoneheart records. Her belly strained the torn laces of a once formal gown, 8 months full and high, while rain dripped through the cracked western windows and spotted the floor like cold tears. Her mate's signet ring cut into her palm. She had gripped it so hard the edges had split skin days ago, and she had not let go once. "Read it," Darius said, voice smooth with practiced grief. He stood where her father had once judged harvest disputes, silver cloak fastened with the Stoneheart crest he had no right to wear. For the elders, for clarity. A scribe stepped forward and unrolled a confession she had never written. The words blurred for a heartbeat, then snapped cruelly into focus. Admission of conspiracy, admission of poison, admission that she had planned her mate's death and intended to pass illegitimate offspring as rightful heir. Each sentence pressed like a boot to her throat. "I did not sign that," Celeste said. Darius did not look at her when he answered. "Your refusal to cooperate is noted. I did not sign it." He turned then, with a patience so gentle it made nausea climb her spine. "Cousin, your scent is fear and grief. You are unwell. Let us spare you further embarrassment." The surrounding elders shifted but did not intervene. One would not meet her gaze at all. Another watched her with the detached interest of a trader examining damaged cargo. The third, old and narrow-shouldered, tapped ink from his quill and said, "Without stable leadership, Stoneheart lands risk fracture. If Lady Celeste admits unfitness, temporary regency is prudent." Lady Celeste. Unfitness. Temporary. Every word arranged like bones in a trap. She rose anyway, using the table edge to steady herself. Mud stained her hem from the graves she had dug herself when no one came to help. Her back ached in a deep, grinding line from shoulder to hip, but anger steadied what hunger and exhaustion had hollowed out. "Prudent would be naming the male who killed my mate," she said. "Prudent would be testing this paper before a moon witness. Prudent would be remembering whose blood built this hall." Darius gave her a look of theatrical sorrow and lifted his hand. Two hunters stepped in behind her, not touching yet, close enough that she felt the heat of them. One smelled of iron and cedar. The other wore wolfsbane on his cuffs, a bright, bitter scent that curled in her nose and made her instincts sharpen with warning. "You are not being punished," Darius said. "You are being protected from your own instability. The Solstice Gathering will judge all claims. Until then, you remain under Silvermane supervision." Supervision. The word landed harder than the threat. By the third night after the slaughter, the keep had become unrecognizable to her, not because walls had changed, but because everyone inside them had. Servants who used to press sweet tea into her hands now flinched back, as if grief were contagious. Guards posted at her chamber door rotated every 2 hours, and each replacement looked at her belly first, face second. At meals, trays arrived late and cold. At dusk, a healer came to take her pulse without greeting and left without a blessing. When she asked for a runner to carry notice to her mother's sister in North Vale, Darius's steward smiled and said all correspondence was restricted until formal review, When she demanded Moon witness on the confession, he answered that legal efficiency did not require spectacle. When she asked where her mate's body had been taken, no one answered at all. Silence was the loudest verdict. That night she sat on the floor beside the bed because lying flat tightened her chest. The child shifted under her ribs, a rolling pressure that made her wince, and then breathe through it. She pressed both hands over the movement and stared at the door until the grain blurred. If I sign, I bury him twice. If I refuse, Darius takes the child by decree. If I wait for help, I become evidence. The room smelled of damp plaster and old smoke. Outside, wind dragged branches across stone in long, scraping strokes. Somewhere down the corridor, two guards laughed softly over dice. Normal sounds, familiar sounds, the kind that made betrayal feel even less survivable. At midnight, a soft knock tapped once, then twice. Mara slipped in with a hooded lamp and a bundle wrapped in butcher cloth. Mara had been her nurse when she was small enough to hide in pantry barrels and steal sugared pears. Now her gray hair was braided tight against her skull, and fear made her mouth a hard line. "You have 6 minutes," Mara whispered, "maybe 7 if the left post keeps drinking." Celeste pushed herself up too quickly and caught the bedpost as dizziness tilted the room. How bad? Worse than rumor. He paid 2 archivists from Grey Archive to alter blood ledgers. Claims your mate filed a rejection petition before he died. Says the child has no standing unless council grants his regency. Mara shoved the cloth bundle into Celeste's arms. Bread, dried meat, tincture, winter cloak. And this. From her apron pocket she drew a small leather case, sealed with dark wax. Inside lay the blood-stained signet of Celeste's mate, heavy and cold, the crest nicked where a blade had struck metal before flesh. The sight of it punched air from her lungs. Mara gripped her shoulders. "Listen to me. Darius is not waiting for law. At dawn he will move you under formal guard to the old East Tower, then march you to Solstice in chains to display contrition. He wants you seen as broken before any hearing begins. If you stay, you arrive already judged. Come with me. I slow you down." Mara's voice did not shake, though tears shone bright in her eyes. "Take the ash tunnel under the root cellar. It opens by the lower marsh road. Keep west until the birch ridge, then north to the solstice stones. Go where witnesses are. Go where he cannot rewrite what 1,000 eyes see." Bootsteps sounded in the corridor, heavier now, coordinated. Mara shoved her toward the wall panel behind the old tapestry. "Move." Celeste caught her hand for one fierce beat. "If he questions you, I will forget everything with conviction." The panel scraped open on hidden hinges. Cold earth breath spilled over Celeste's face, damp and mineral, thick with rot and wet roots. She swallowed fear, pulled the cloak tight over her belly, and stepped down into blackness as Mara closed the wall behind her. The tunnel pitched steeply, forcing her to brace one hand on slick stone while the other cradled the curve of her abdomen. Water dripped from the ceiling in irregular taps. Mud sucked at her boots. Each step jarred her lower back and sent a hot ache across her hips. She moved anyway, counting breaths to keep panic from splintering into useless motion. At the first fork she stopped, heart hammering, listening. Voices filtered faintly through stone above, then the muffled clang of a door thrown open. Someone shouted her name. Another shouted for hounds. She took the left passage because Mara had once told her left led to light, and because there was no room left in her life for hesitation disguised as prudence. The passage narrowed until her shoulders brushed both walls. Roots dangled like knotted cords, slick against her cheek. Twice she stumbled and caught herself on one knee, palms stinging against grit. The child shifted again, not frantic, just present, insistent, a reminder that she was carrying future and evidence and target in one body. She breathed into that knowledge and kept moving. After what felt like an hour and might have been 12 minutes, Wind touched her face, thin and cold. She pushed through the final screen of brambles and emerged into the lower marsh under a moon veiled by fast clouds. Rain had started, fine and relentless, turning the path to black glass. Behind her, far above, horns sounded from the keep. One short blast, then two. Hunt signal. She tasted metal at the back of her throat and began to run. Run was generous for what her body managed. A driven, uneven pace through sucking mud and reed shadow, one hand lifting skirt, the other guarding her belly from branches and sudden slips. Marsh water soaked through her boots within moments. Thorn canes scored her wrists. Once she slid down a bank into knee-deep water and surfaced choking, cloak dragging like chainmail. She hauled herself out by grabbing a willow root and stood bent double until the spinning in her vision eased. By dawn, the rain had become mist, and the birch ridge rose ahead in pale trunks like a line of watching ghosts. Celeste climbed it on shaking legs and looked back. Across the valley, tiny torch points moved in a spread formation. Hunters, not close enough to grab, not far enough to forget. At the crest, she found wagon ruts leading north, deep and recent. Solstice traffic. Witness roads. She opened her fist and looked at the signet ring resting in her mud-caked palm, blood dried dark in the engraved crest. Proof, promise, burden. They will hear you, she whispered to the dead, to the child, to herself. Even if I have to crawl. Then she turned toward the gathering road and walked into the thinning dark, every step a refusal to kneel before judgment had even begun. The road narrowed between stands of wind-bent fir, and Celeste kept to the rut where wagon wheels had churned mud into a dark, treacherous ribbon that at least pointed north. Dawn thinned into a colorless morning, then into a brittle gray day that offered no warmth, only clarity she did not want. Every sound carried too far in the wet air. Crow calls, hoofbeats somewhere behind, the rattle of her own breathing. Her thighs trembled with each step. Pressure cinched around her lower back in hard waves, easing, returning, easing again. Not labor, she told herself, not yet. Stress and cold and miles paid in pain, but not yet. By mid-afternoon, the trees opened to a long ridge of standing stones carved with old pack marks. Antler, crescent, claw, flame, and at the center, a moon split by a crown of thorns. Blood moon territory began there, or at least, blood moon protection for the solstice gathering. She knew the symbol from treaties her father had once made her memorize beside winter fires, naming each ruling house like prayer and warning both. The crown thorn moon had always meant one thing in those lessons: king right, final appeal. No safe lies, once a claim reached that line. Relief struck so hard it almost dropped her to her knees. Then the wind shifted. Wolves. Male, armed, close. 5 men stepped from the tree line in dark leather and fur, not in hunting formation but in guard spacing, disciplined and silent until their leader raised a hand. He wore no silvermane braid, no stone heart colors, only a black cloak pinned with the same crown thorn moon etched in the stones. His gaze swept from Celeste's mud-streaked face to the swollen curve under her cloak and settled there with sharp calculation. "Name," he said. "Celeste Stoneheart." Her voice rasped. She swallowed and tried again. "Daughter of Aemon, widow of Rowan Stoneheart. I request witness under solstice law." A beat of stillness. The leader's posture changed, subtle but immediate, as if a blade had been drawn inside the conversation. "Your house was declared under regency this morning," he said, "by Darius Silvermane petition." I know what he declared. She held out her hand, fingers shaking, and opened her palm to show the blood-stained signet. "I am carrying Stoneheart heir blood. I carry proof of murder. I request witness." One of the younger guards took half a step closer, eyes narrowing at the ring, and the older leader cut him off with a glance. You are on Blood Moon Held Road now. No one touches you without process. You will be escorted to the lower hall. Hoofbeats cracked through the trees before she could answer. Not one horse. Many. Darius's hunters broke from the southern trail in gray cloaks, mud splashed to their chests, two already with bows half drawn out of reflex. Their captain, broad-shouldered and red-faced from the ride, reined in hard enough to spray muck across the stones. "That woman is Silvermane Custody," he snapped. "Stand aside." The Blood Moon leader did not move. "You are 10 strides inside protected boundary. Lower your weapons." She fled lawful guard. She requested witness. She is accused of treason and false breeding claims. She is a pregnant claimant under Solstice Mark. The leader's voice stayed level, but authority settled around him like iron setting. "You know the code as well as I do. No seizure without council eyes." For one breath, Celeste thought the hunters would rush anyway. Hands tightened on bow grips. Wolves pressed close beneath skin. She could scent it in the spike of musk and heat. Her own instincts sharpened to a bright, painful point, the animal part of her going rigid with the knowledge that if violence started here, she could not outrun any of it. The hunter captain spat into the mud. "Then we go together. She answers before every alpha." "She does," the Blood Moon leader said, under guard from both parties. He turned to Celeste and she expected impatience, suspicion, contempt, any of the familiar currencies of power. What she got instead was procedural care, clean and unadorned. "Can you ride?" he asked, "or do you need a cart and healer first?" The question almost undid her. No one had asked what she needed in days. "I can ride," she said, "if someone steadies the mount." He nodded once. "Then we move." The solstice grounds spread across a high valley ringed by pines and old stone, half temporary encampment, half permanent sacred architecture. Tents in pack colors curved around a central hall of black timber and pale pillars that looked carved from moonlight itself. Smoke rose in straight gray threads from cook fires. Bells rang from somewhere uphill, low and measured. Everywhere she looked, wolves watched from human faces, from half-shifted silhouettes, from the edges of crowds where power gathered and pretended to be civility. By early evening, the rain had finally stopped, leaving the air metallic and cold. They took her first to a holding chamber near the council hall, where a healer checked her pulse and belly with brisk hands and said the child's heartbeat was strong. They gave her water, broth, and a clean wrap for her shoulders. They did not remove the iron cuffs Darius's men had locked on at the boundary. They did not remove them because Darius himself arrived before sunset with 6 advisors, and grievance already sharpened on his tongue. "You look almost dignified," he said, when they brought her into the antechamber outside the main hall. His smile never touched his eyes. "Road mud suits? Penitence." She stared past him at the carved doors, refusing his bait. "If your case is sound, you should be eager for witness." His expression thinned. "Witness is useful when people remember their place." He leaned closer, voice dropping so only she could hear. "Kneel correctly tonight and I may request nursery access instead of full custodial transfer. Fight me in front of this council and they will call you unstable by first bell." The child kicked hard, a sudden rolling strike beneath her ribs. Celeste placed her cuffed hands over the movement and lifted her chin. "If you wanted me silent," she said, "you should have buried me with him." A muscle jumped in Darius's jaw. Then he stepped back, smoothing his sleeves as if nothing had passed between them at all. The doors opened. Horns sounded once. The hearing began. The great hall smelled of pine resin, cold stone, wet wool, and old power. 9 throne seats rose in a curved dais beneath an oculus where twilight pooled like ink. Alphas filled the lower tiers in formal ranks, their scents layered and clashing until breathing itself felt like swallowing knives. Celeste heard her name called, heard charges read, heard Darius present forged parchment with tragic restraint, and all of it seemed to happen at a distance, as if she were watching her own life from the far side of glass. Then came the ritual demand. By claimant contamination statute, the chief elder announced, the accused widow will kneel before each seated alpha and petition temporary shelter as lesser until lineage and culpability are resolved. A murmur rippled through the chamber, not shock. Recognition. Procedure. Dress to wound. Darius bowed as if honoring law. For unity, I support the elder's wisdom. A guard touched her elbow. Kneel. She did. Once. Then rose, moved 2 steps. Knelt again before the first throne. Alpha Merrick of East Fen looked down with discomfort he made no effort to hide and said, petition heard. She rose. 2 steps. Kneel. Alpha Brune of Salt Coast barely glanced at her before granting conditional shelter. Rise. Move. Kneel. Again and again, each submission a legal punctuation mark turning person into case file. At the 5th kneel, her knees burned through fabric into stone. At the 7th, black flecks edged her vision. At the 8th, she thought of her mother's hands braiding her hair before first moon ceremony, whispering that dignity lived in the spine and no one could strip what she refused to surrender. She held to that like rope. There was one throne left, highest seat on the curve, carved darker than the others, flanked by wolf standards stitched in black and silver. The last alpha had not spoken yet all night. He sat still as winter at the edge of a storm, broad shoulders framed by a fur-lined cloak, dark hair tied at the nape, hands resting open on the chair arms as if he had chosen restraint and did not trust it to hold forever. Lachlan Blood Moon. She knew him by reputation before sight, the Alpha King who ended border wars in 3 nights, who kept rogue bands from preying on outer villages, who did not attend gatherings unless law itself was at stake. Men like Darius invoked his name as threat and shield both. Seeing him in person was like meeting a mountain and realizing mountains could watch back. Final petition, the elder intoned. Kneel before the Blood Moon throne. Celeste stepped forward. Her cuffs clinked softly. The hall went so quiet she could hear torches hiss. She began to lower herself. Lachlan stood. The movement cracked through the room harder than a shout. He descended the 2 shallow steps from his throne with predatory grace, stopped directly before her, and for a heartbeat she thought he would lift her by force, that this was simply a different form of command. Instead, he dropped to 1 knee first. Gasps broke across the tiers. Darius made a strangled sound she had never heard from him, pure disbelief turning sharp. No maid of mine kneels in chains, Lachlan said, and his voice carried without effort to every corner of the hall. The world tilted. Heat pulsed beneath Celeste's skin, starting at her sternum and spreading in fierce concentric waves. Her lungs seized on an inhale that would not complete. The baby kicked once, hard enough to fold pain and wonder together. Scent slammed into her senses all at once. Cedar smoke, winter air, iron, rain on stone, male wolf and grief and restraint, and something achingly known. A warm golden thread seemed to lock from the center of her chest to his, not imagined, not metaphor, a living current of pulse and recognition that made her hands shake. Lachlan inhaled sharply, head lifting as if struck. Amber bled into his irises, predator surfacing without concealment. Power rolled off him in visible pressure, not an attack yet, but warning enough that several alphas shifted back in their seats. Inside her, chaos opened like a fault line. I cannot do this. I cannot betray the dead. I cannot trust a bond born in a courtroom built to break me. But this pull is not ambition, not pity, not strategy. This is body and soul knowing before mind consents. This is terror because I have already lost once, and I am carrying more than my own heart now. This is hunger for safety I do not believe in. This is rage at needing anyone. This is relief so sudden it hurts. If I reach for him, I may survive and still drown in guilt. If I refuse, I return to chains dressed as law. I am still kneeling. I am still standing. I am both. And the choice is no longer theoretical. It is here, breathing in front of me, with his knee on cold stone and his gaze fixed on mine as if the entire hall has ceased to exist. Celeste, he said, quieter now, but no less absolute. Look at me. She already was. Locked in his stare, she saw not triumph, not possession, but a male holding fury on a razor edge because one wrong move might frighten the woman fate had just tied to him in front of his enemies. She felt his control like a physical thing. She felt, through that impossible new thread between them, the first raw flare of his protectiveness when he looked at the bruised shadows under her eyes, the iron at her wrists, the way she braced around pain and called it composure. Darius found his voice first. This is coercion by throne. She has manipulated the bond. She has always been... Lachlan did not turn. Choose your next words with care. The warning landed like a blade laid flat against a throat. Celeste drew one full breath at last, then another, and straightened from her half-kneel to stand level with him as he rose. The hall watched as if witnessing law rewritten in real time. The golden pull between them did not ease. It settled, steady, waiting. Then the hall remembered itself and erupted. Elders rose half out of their seats, voices colliding in outrage and procedure, while lower-tier alphas leaned forward with predatory focus sharpened by scandal. Darius stepped into the center aisle with both hands spread, performing reason as if he had not spent the last hour engineering humiliation. This hearing is compromised, he said. Bond interference invalidates testimony. She must be isolated and examined by neutral parties. Lachlan turned at last, and silence moved outward from him in a hard, widening ring. Compromised, he repeated, each syllable measured. You paraded a pregnant claimant in irons and called it neutrality. The chief elder tried to reclaim control, quill shaking above his notes. Alpha King, custom requires completion of ritual submission. Custom is subordinate to king right when harm is evident. Lachlan's gaze cut to the guard at Celeste's side. Unlock her. The guard looked to Darius first. A mistake. Lachlan did not raise his voice, but the second order landed like thunder under skin. Now. Iron clicked. The cuffs dropped from Celeste's wrists, and sensation returned in painful needles up her forearms. She did not realize she was swaying until Lachlan shifted, one hand half lifted, then stopped in midair and waited. He did not touch her. May I? He asked quietly. She stared at his open hand, at the restraint in his shoulders, at the visible effort it cost him not to take command of the room by force. Yes, she said, surprised by how small the word sounded. His fingers closed around her forearm with careful firmness, only enough pressure to steady. Heat moved through the bond thread again, not a surge this time, a low thrum like a second heartbeat finding rhythm beside her own. Darius laughed once, brittle and sharp. A theatrical display does not erase her charges. No, Lachlan said. Evidence does. You will present yours at first bell under Oathstone review. Until then, Lady Celeste remains under crown protection. Darius's mouth flattened. She is Silvermane blood. She is Stoneheart blood, Lachlan answered, and my acknowledged mate. The words struck the chamber harder than the kneel had. Celeste felt every gaze in the hall swing toward her, weighing, calculating, revising. She had spent days as prey in legal language. In one sentence, the hunt map changed. Lachlan inclined his head toward the chief elder. Record this. No claimant under my protection will kneel by coercion. Any attempt to compel contact, handling, or scent verification without her consent is a direct challenge to the Blood Moon throne. He guided Celeste down from the dais, slow enough for her pace, and did not look back as the hall split around them. By full dark, storm clouds had closed over the valley again, and the guest wing assigned to crown-guarded claimants smelled of juniper smoke, clean linen, and wet wool drying by the hearth. It should have felt safe. Instead, every shadow carried memory. Closed doors, male voices deciding her body belonged to procedure. Keys turning. A pain gripped low in her abdomen, sharp enough to steal breath. Another followed before the first had fully faded. The healer assigned to her chamber moved at once, reaching for her belly with brisk professional hands. Stress contractions. We need to examine dilation. 3 guards stood just beyond the threshold. Another healer entered with a satchel of instruments. Too many strangers. Too many hands. Celeste backed toward the bed, pulse climbing into panic. I said no, she managed. Lady, refusal is unwise in your state. The room narrowed. Sound thinned at the edges. She could smell wolfsbane tincture in someone's kit, bitter and bright, and terror rose in her throat with animal certainty. Lachlan stepped between her and the healer in one fluid movement. Out, he said. The healer bristled. Alpha King, with respect, she needs monitoring. She has monitoring outside that door. His tone remained controlled, which made it more frightening than a shout. Leave hot water, pain leaf, and cloth. You return only if she asks. The guards hesitated until he turned his head toward them. If anyone enters this chamber without her consent, you answer to me personally. They left. The door shut. Quiet fell, broken only by rain ticking against the window shutters and Celeste's uneven breathing. Lachlan crossed to the hearth, fed another log to the coals, and set an iron kettle over the flame himself. The king of the most feared territory in the north rolled up his sleeves and tested water temperature with 2 fingers as if it were the most ordinary task in the world. Celeste watched from the bed's edge, one hand braced under her belly, confusion tangling with suspicion until she could not separate them. You dismiss trained healers, she said. That was reckless. I dismissed people you did not trust, he said without turning. Different problem. Another contraction tightened through her back and hips. She hissed through her teeth, pressing both palms to the mattress. He carried the basin to her, set it within reach, then lowered himself to sit on the floor instead of the chair beside her. Below eye level. No looming weight, no throne posture. I am staying here, he said. No touching unless you ask. No decisions made over your head. If pain changes, tell me. If you want the healer, I call her. If you want silence, I keep it. She searched his face for performance and found fatigue, fury banked hard, and a discipline that looked carved from old wounds. Why? She asked, voice rough. Are you doing this? His jaw flexed once. Because power without consent is just polished violence. I learned that too late once. He looked at the fire when he spoke again, as if giving memory to flame made it easier to hold. Years ago, a treaty-bound betrothal was arranged for me. Useful bloodline, useful alliance. She said yes in public and no in private. My council called it nerves and ordered preparations. I ended it anyway. My advisors called me weak. 2 border houses rebelled that winter. We buried 37 wolves because men in polished chairs believed duty outranked choice. Rain deepened outside, steady and relentless. I do not repeat that, he said. Not with enemies, not with allies, not with you. Another wave of pain crested and passed. Celeste breathed through it, slower this time, following his count when he offered it in a low cadence. In for 4. Hold for 2. Out for 6. Again. Again. The child shifted, then settled. Inside her, thoughts collided in raw present tense. I am so tired of cages that call themselves care. I am so tired of being told what fear should look like, what grief should permit, what gratitude should cost. He sits on the floor while I shake, and that should not matter, but it does. He asks before touching, and my body notices before my pride can object. I do not owe him trust because fate tied a thread through my chest. I do not owe anyone surrender. Yet this room is quiet because he chose restraint when command would have been easier. If I lean toward this, I might survive and still betray the memory of what I lost. If I refuse every offered hand, I raise my child inside a fortress made of loneliness. I need to choose something other than fear. Not forever. Just this breath. She lifted her arm, wrist turned upward, an offering so small it felt like standing on a cliff edge. Here, she whispered. Lachlan went still, then shifted closer on his knees. He did not seize her hand. He cradled her wrist between both palms as if holding something breakable, bowed his head, and pressed his forehead lightly to her pulse. The bond warmed, a gentle current instead of a storm. I swear, he said, voice barely above the fire, I will guard your child as fiercely as my own blood. If you never accept me, the oath stands. If you send me away tomorrow, the oath stands. You and your heir will not be bartered while I breathe. Tears burned behind her eyes before she could stop them. She exhaled a shaky laugh that surprised them both. The feared Alpha King, she muttered, apparently qualified for midwife duty. A rough, startled laugh broke from him, brief and real. Do not spread that rumor. I have a reputation to maintain. The next contraction came milder, then another, farther apart. By the time the kettle cooled, the worst had passed. By the next afternoon, the council reconvened in the smaller oath chamber where disputes were usually settled by ledger and scent testimony rather than spectacle. Stone benches rose in narrow tiers. The central floor held an inlaid moon circle worn smooth by generations of legal rituals that called themselves impartial. Celeste entered with 2 crown guards and Lachlan at her side. She wore a plain dark gown borrowed from Blood Moon stores and the heavy cloak he had sent at dawn, black wool lined in fur, the crown thorn clasp cool against her throat. Her wrists were unbound. The absence felt almost as startling as the weight of the cloak. Darius stood already at the witness table, flanked by 2 council advocates. He smiled when he saw her, then let his gaze drop to the curve of her belly with calculated contempt. The chief elder cleared his throat. Given disputed lineage and recent bond declaration, verification is required. The council proposes structured scent binding assessment by 3 neutral alphas and 1 archivist witness. The words were clean, the meaning was not. Celeste felt the old nausea rise. Different hall, same knife. Lachlan moved before she could answer. He stepped down from the bench, crossed the circle, and stopped directly in front of her. In full view of every elder, he unclasped his own outer cloak and settled it around her shoulders over the one she already wore, layering warmth and claim and protection without trapping her arms. Then he faced the council. Denied. The chief elder stiffened. Alpha King, protocol. Protocol does not override consent. Lachlan's voice carried to the back wall. King right invoked. No physical verification by any male except me, and only with her explicit approval. Darius slapped a palm against the table. He is bewitched by her. You all saw it. She has turned the throne sentimental. Lachlan's gaze flicked to him, cold and precise, then returned to Celeste. The entire room waited while he asked, in a tone meant only for her, though everyone heard it, Do you wish to speak? No one had asked her that in council since her father died. She could feel 60 eyes pressing for performance, breakdown, gratitude, rage. She let the silence lengthen until discomfort shifted through the benches like a draft. Then she straightened under both cloaks and kept her chin level. No, she said. One word. Chosen. not extracted. Lachlan nodded once and turned back to the elders. Her silence is not admission. It is a boundary. Record it. He stepped to the center seal where Law carried best and let his alpha aura rise just enough that the nearest lamps trembled in their brackets. Record this as well, he said. Any challenge to Lady Celesta's dignity is now a challenge to crown protection. Any attempt to reduce her to an incubator, asset, or transferable claim will be prosecuted as treason against Interpac order. You may examine ledgers, oath stones, and witnesses. You may not examine her like livestock. The chamber went very still. Darius tried once more, voice sharpened by panic he could no longer hide. You would risk civil fracture for one woman? Lachlan did not look at him when he answered. I would prevent civil fracture by ending the custom that makes this possible. The chief elder stared at his notes for a long moment, then dipped his quill. So entered. Proceedings moved to document review after that. Archivists were summoned. Seals were checked. Darius's forged rejection petition was marked for blood ink analysis before Moon Witness. No one approached Celeste. No one asked her to kneel. When the council finally recessed, she remained standing in the moon circle, pulse loud in her ears, as benches emptied around her. The bond thread between her and Lachlan hummed with restrained vigilance, not possession, waiting for her pace. He held out his arm, offering escort and nothing more. For a heartbeat, old reflex told her to refuse every kindness on principle, to keep every wall intact until the world proved it deserved access. Then she remembered him on the floor beside her bed, counting breaths in the dark while rain hit the shutters and fear loosened its grip 1 careful inch at a time. Celeste placed her hand on his arm. It was not surrender. Not yet. But it was the first door she had opened herself. Her fingers tightened once on Lachlan's arm, then eased as they crossed the threshold into the corridor, where torchlight wavered across black stone and the murmur of departing counselors thinned into distant echoes. He matched her pace without steering it, a careful courtesy that should have felt small and instead landed as something non-trivial, a recalibration of how power could occupy space beside her without swallowing it. At the bend near the records chamber, a blood moon clerk hurried toward them with 2 sealed tablets and a narrow strip of treated hide. Preliminary findings from ledger review, he said, bowing first to Lachlan, then to Celeste with visible uncertainty, as if he was still learning where to place her in the hierarchy that had shifted beneath everyone's feet. Lachlan broke the first seal and scanned quickly, jaw hardening. He handed the tablet to Celeste. The report was terse and devastating in its precision. The rejection petition attributed to Rowan Stoneheart had been written on authentic Stoneheart stock, but the blood ink signature had been layered over a scraped original mark. 2 distinct hands, 1 dead, 1 recent. The archivists could not yet name the forger, but they had identified transfer vouchers to Grey Archive paid in Silvermane Mint ingots within 3 days of the massacre at her hall. Not enough for final judgment, Lachlan said, voice low as they resumed walking. But enough to expose intent. Celeste stared at the page until the carved letters blurred. Darius had not merely lied in anger, he had designed an administrative machine to erase her, with receipts, witnesses, and legal timing arranged so every objection would sound like hysteria. In the strategy chamber, winter maps covered 1 wall, and the long table was weighted with oath books, seal boxes, and a basin of cooling tea no one had touched. Captain Evo stood beside the hearth, scar down 1 cheek, posture rigid with contained frustration. Across from him sat Elder Senna, one of the few council voices who had not looked away during the kneeling ritual. Her hands were folded over a cane of polished yew, knuckles pale. He filed 3 motions before dawn, Senna said without preamble. Custodial transfer petition, emergency lineage uncertainty petition, and a request to advance Moon Oath review to tomorrow night on grounds of public unrest. Celeste looked up sharply. Tomorrow? 2 nights early, Senna confirmed. He is compressing procedure so evidence cannot mature. Evo slid a second tablet across the table. We intercepted copies of rumor broadsheets circulating through outer camp. They claim Rowan publicly rejected you before his death, that the child carries dormant crown blood through Stoneheart collateral, and that only a male regent can prevent succession war. The language is crafted for fear. The crux of it snapped into place with bitter clarity. Darius did not need everyone to believe he was innocent. He needed enough Pax to believe her uncertainty was dangerous. If the Assembly could be convinced that an unborn heir might trigger inter-pack fracture, then seizing her child could be reframed as civic duty. Lachlan rested both palms on the table, leaning over the maps as if bracing against the weight of rage. He wants regency over your baby before the child draws breath, he said. He rules Stoneheart by proxy, leverages lineage panic against the crown, and calls it stabilization. Senna's expression tightened. There is more. 2 Grey Archive clerks disappeared after submitting preliminary corrections. One was found on the South Road with memory scrape herbs in his system. Alive, incoherent. The other has not been recovered. A chill moved through Celeste that had nothing to do with damp stone. Darius was not improvising. He was burning witnesses in advance. By the second night in the valley, the camps had developed their own weather, currents of rumor and allegiance moving faster than official decrees. Everywhere Celeste walked under guard, conversations cut off, then resumed in lowered tones as soon as she passed. Lachlan dismissed the chamber to only the 3 of them and waited until the door shut. You need every decision point in plain terms, he said to Celeste. If Moon Oath is advanced and you refuse the circle, hostile elders will argue procedural forfeiture. Darius gains temporary custody claim pending final review. If you appear, he will force public pressure, likely provoke panic, possibly violence. He benefits from either outcome unless we break the underlying narrative. And the narrative, Celeste said, forcing steadiness into each word, is that I am unstable, unverified, and useful only as a container. Lachlan held her gaze. Yes. Silence stretched. Fire cracked in the hearth. Outside, a bell rang 3 slow notes for night watch. She was so tired that the room felt farther away than it was. She could feel the bond at the edge of her breathing, warm and insistent. And she did not know whether that warmth was salvation or another chain with better craftsmanship. Rowan was dead. That truth was stone. Lachlan was here, alive, refusing to bargain with her dignity. That truth was harder because it asked something of her in the present tense. If she trusted him, she risked being wrong in front of wolves who had already measured her value by how far she would bend. If she did not trust him, Darius would write the end of her story in legal ink while she stood frozen with pride. She could not grieve by disappearing. She could not protect this child with principles that never survived contact with men like her cousin. She needed evidence. She needed witnesses. She needed to stop mistaking isolation for integrity. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter but cleaner. What does he fear most? Open testimony he cannot script, Senna said. Blood witness tied to old law, Ivo added. Stoneheart widow right still exists in pre-union code, rarely invoked, but valid if accepted by presiding alpha. Celeste turned to Lachlan. Would you accept it? His answer came without pause. If you choose it. The bond hummed, not triumphant, simply present. She hated that the sound of his certainty made her chest loosen. A courier arrived before midnight carrying a carved wooden box wrapped in faded blue ribbon, the kind Stoneheart women used on midwinter keepsakes. The guard at the door announced it as recovered property from her family hall, forwarded by Silvermane attendants as a gesture of kin reconciliation before Moon Oath. Celeste knew the box before she touched it. Her mother had used that same carved pattern, mountain ash leaves curling around a crescent moon. Inside lay a silver locket, oval and dented near the hinge, one she had not seen since she was 17, and careless enough to leave heirlooms on window sills. She sat at the small table by her chamber fire and held it in her palm, while memory struck with painful softness, her mother laughing as she fastened it around Celeste's neck, saying Stoneheart daughters carried their dead close and their living closer. Lachlan stood across the room in discussion with Ivo about watch rotations, giving her distance. The locket looked harmless, precious even. Exactly the kind of object designed to disarm caution by reaching for old love first. Celeste pressed her thumb to the clasp. A scent cut through the room like a knife through linen. Bitter, bright, wrong. "Do not open it," Lachlan said, already moving. His hand closed over hers just before the clasp clicked. He inhaled once over the metal, expression turning lethal. Wolfsbane. Ivo swore under his breath and drew a cloth from his belt, taking the locket with gloved care. The clasp mechanism, examined under lamplight, held a spring needle hidden inside the hinge. Pressure release would have driven it into the pad of her thumb. Not a battlefield ambush. A family keepsake turned into a delivery system calibrated for trust. Celeste sat very still while cold traveled up her spine in a slow, merciless line. Darius had not only anticipated her need for comfort, he had weaponized her mother's memory to get close enough for a clean death that could be blamed on stress, poison hidden beneath grief. Lachlan knelt in front of her this time without ceremony, his hands braced on the table's edge so he would not grab her unless asked. Something ancient looked out through his eyes, fury barely leashed. "He will not reach you again," he said. "He already did," she answered, voice thin. "He reached through my mother." Ivo straightened with the boxed evidence sealed in treated wrap. "I will log chain of custody now, submit for toxin confirmation, and post 2 tasters on all personal deliveries." "Do it," Lachlan said, "and circulate counterfeit alert to every gate." The moment Ivo left, another knock struck the door, harder, urgent. A junior guard entered breathing fast. Movement on the north parapet. 2 intruders in healer cloaks. One attempted access to this wing using forged crown seal. Lachlan was on his feet before the sentence ended. "Lock this chamber," he ordered 2 guards in the hall. To Celeste, softer. "I will be back." "No." The word came from her before fear could recast it. She stood, one hand under her belly, the other on the chair for balance. "If this is tied to me, I am done waiting behind doors while men decide how dangerous my life is." His refusal rose to his mouth, then stopped. Trade-offs flashed across his face. Protection versus respect. Instinct versus promise. At last he gave a sharp nod. "You stay between me and the wall. If I say down, you go down." They moved through the corridor at speed, boots striking stone, torch smoke thickening as wind shoved through arrow slits. At the north junction, one body lay bound and groaning beside a dropped satchel of medical wraps. The second intruder broke from shadow near the stair, blade flashing toward Celeste's side with the direct efficiency of someone who had studied her gait and guard spacing. Lachlan intercepted, forearm taking the strike, momentum carrying both males into the pillar. Steel rang. Celeste did not scream. She stepped back exactly once, then saw the third shape she had not clocked at first, perched on the landing above with a compact crossbow already leveled. Training she did not know she still possessed surged to the front. She seized the fallen satchel, whipped it upward, and knocked the shot wide. The bolt shattered against stone where her head had been an instant earlier. Guards flooded the passage. The crossbowman ran and was tackled at the stair bend. The blade attacker fought with reckless silence until Lachlan disarmed him and drove him to his knees under a chokehold that stopped just short of killing force. "Who sent you?" Ivo demanded, wrenching the assassin's arm behind his back. The male spat blood-tinged saliva and laughed once, breathless. Moon oath, he rasped. Crowd panic, bond backlash. She dies screaming, and you call it fate. He clamped his jaw before they could force more. Lachlan caught the movement too late. A hidden toxin capsule cracked between the assassin's teeth. The male convulsed once and went limp, alive but unconscious, pulse thready. Healer, Lachlan barked. Now, keep him breathing. The corridor smelled of oil, wet wool, wolfsbane residue from the satchel trap, and fear stripped of pretense. Celeste's knees shook violently all at once, delayed reaction hitting like a wave after impact. Lachlan turned to her, reaching, then pausing that final inch until she nodded. His hand came to the back of her neck, steady and warm. Evo climbed from the stair bend, face grim. He held up the captured crossbowman's wrist, where a fresh brand had been burned into skin. Silvermane crest over a crude moon sigil. Not subtle anymore, he said. This was a declaration. Down in the main courtyard, the warning bells began to ring, one after another, dragging the entire Solstice Valley awake. Council runners would be sprinting already. Darius would deny everything by dawn and demand accelerated judgment by dusk, arguing that unrest proved the need for immediate custodial control. Celeste looked from the unconscious assassin to the blood on Lachlan's sleeve, then to the sky beyond the arrow slit where storm clouds had split, and a thin, merciless moon stared down at the fortress. Critical did not begin tomorrow. It had already arrived. Critical did not begin tomorrow. It had already arrived, and the bells were dragging every alpha, elder, and guard into the same corridor of consequence at once. Runners streaked through the fortress with lanterns held high, shouting for an emergency assembly under moon law. Evo snapped orders over the noise, dispatching teams to seal the healer wing, seize all incoming parcels, and drag every forged seal from the gate ledger before it could vanish. Within minutes, Elder Senna appeared at the North Junction wrapped in a dark traveling cloak, silver hair half fallen from its pins, her expression carved from controlled fury. "Status," she demanded. "One assassin breathing, one captured, one down," Evo said. "Poison capsule used. We have a Silvermane brand, forged healer credentials, and a Wolfsbane delivery disguised as family keepsake." Senna's gaze found Celeste, then the blood on Lachlan's sleeve. He struck at claimant and crown on protected ground. Emergency moon oath triggers automatically under this degree of breach. She turned, voice rising to the guards on the stairs. "Open the sacred circle. Summon all seated alphas. No private caucus. No delay." The courtyard filled fast, wolves and humans crowding beneath torchlight while storm clouds tore open above the valley. Darius entered through the eastern arch in formal silver, 6 retainers at his back, and outrage arranged neatly across his face. He did not look surprised enough. That, more than anything, chilled Celeste. "What is this disorder?" he called, projecting for the assembly. "Why is my grieving cousin unshielded while blood moon blades turn the grounds into theater?" Lachlan stepped down one stair, voice flat as forged steel. "Your men entered crown quarters in healer cloaks." Darius spread his hands. An accusation built on panic. Anyone can burn a brand. Anyone can plant a crest. Ivo held up the wrapped locket. "Needle trap tested. Wolfsbane concentration calibrated for skin puncture. Delivered under your household forwarding seal." Darius did not flinch. Convenient. The oathstone was rolled into the center of the circle, a waist-high pillar of pale rock veined with faint blue light, ancient and unforgiving. Elders took their seats in a hard ring. Alphas stood beyond them, shoulder to shoulder, the air thick with scent, rank, and fear that events had slipped beyond procedural control. Celeste could feel danger in every direction now, not as one blade, but as a system trying to decide which version of truth was least disruptive. A healer pushed through from the inner gate and bowed to Senna, breath ragged. The poisoned assassin regained consciousness for less than a minute. He named payment in Silvermane trade bars and said, quote, "Moon oath crowd panic, claimant death by bond strain, then silence." The healer swallowed. "He is dead." A murmur broke across the circle. Darius seized it immediately. Dead testimony from an unknown killer, and suddenly all roads point to me. How elegant. How useful to a king who has already declared partiality by mating claim. The crux tightened. If this became only competing authority, packs would split along allegiance instead of evidence. Celeste felt the familiar pull toward retreat, toward walls, toward letting stronger voices tear each other apart over her body while she survived in the margins. Then she looked at the Oathstone, at the old law she had nearly forgotten, and understood that silence tonight would not preserve her. It would erase her. "I am afraid. I am still afraid. I am carrying a child while men debate whether my life counts as testimony. I can feel every eye waiting for me to tremble, to hide, to become a symbol they can barter. If I step forward, I cannot step halfway. If I speak, I place Rowan's death in open air where no private grief can protect it anymore. But I am done being curated by other people's narratives. I am done mistaking endurance for agency. I am done kneeling as strategy. I choose the risk that leaves a record." Celeste moved before anyone could reframe the moment. She walked into the sacred circle beside Lachlan, then one step ahead of him, and faced the elders with both hands visible. "I invoke Stoneheart Widow Right," she said, voice carrying farther than she expected. "By blood testimony, by memory witness, by oathstone law predating regency claims." Senna rose halfway from her chair, surprise cutting through protocol. "Widow right requires willing blood and open consequence. If false, you forfeit standing." Celeste lifted her chin. "If false, take my standing. If true, take his name." Darius laughed, too sharp. "She is unstable. She has been coached." Lachlan did not answer him. He spoke to Celeste alone, low enough to be private in a public place. "Are you certain?" "Yes." She held out her hand. "Blade." He offered his ceremonial knife hilt first. She drew the edge across her palm in one clean line and pressed blood to the oath stone. The rock drank it with a soft, luminous pulse. Pain flared bright, then thinned into heat that climbed her arm, crossed her chest, and surged through the bond like moonlit current. The child shifted, then settled into a steady rhythm under her ribs as if listening. "Stone remembers," Celeste whispered. Light broke from the oath stone in a silver arc and rose into the dark above the circle. Not fire, not smoke, but memory rendered in living image. The assembly gasped as the final night at Stoneheart Hall unfolded across the sky. Rowan staggering from a wound, Darius stepping from shadow with grief already rehearsed, words too faint to catch. Then the unmistakable motion of Darius driving a blade beneath Rowan's ribs while two paid hunters held the corridor. Rowan fell. Darius leaned close and wiped the hilt with Rowan's own hand before shouting for witnesses. "No!" Darius barked, backing a step. "Forgery! Witchwork!" The memories shifted again without her prompting. Ledger room, scraped signatures, Silvermane ingots changing hands to gray archive clerks, a scribe burning draft pages, Darius dictating lines about tainted air blood while sealing orders for hunter deployment. The crowd broke into open shouting. Some alphas demanded immediate seizure. Others yelled for procedural review. In that fracture, 3 figures in council livery shoved through the outer ring and drew short blades, not toward the dais, but toward the packed civilian gallery where attendants and younger pack members stood pinned between benches. Celeste saw the angle first. Not assassination of one target now. Mass panic, stampede, bodies. She planted her bleeding palm against her belly and reached through the bond with everything she had, not for attack, but for containment. Silver light burst outward from her feet in a widening dome, thin as glass and strong as oath iron, curving around the civilian tiers and locking at the edges with rune links that snapped into place like chain. Blades struck the barrier and skidded away in bright sparks. Children behind the front benches screamed once, then went silent as guards pulled them low under cover. Lachlan's voice cut through the roar. Protective wall holds. Strike teams. Take the infiltrators. The attackers were down within breaths, disarmed and pinned. The barrier trembled but did not fail. Celeste's knees threatened to buckle. She kept her stance anyway. Breath sawing, palm burning, vision narrowed to silver lines and the pulse of life sheltered behind them. When she finally lowered the shield, the circle had changed. No one looked at her like freight anymore. They looked as if they had just watched Law acquire a spine. Darius's composure shattered. He ripped a ceremonial blade from the nearest guard and charged, face contorted, voice ragged with naked contempt. No one will believe a grieving womb over a ruling male. Lachlan intercepted, forearm turning the strike wide as steel rang off stone, but he did not finish it. Celeste stepped between them before the next motion could resolve. "Stop," she said, and the command in her tone froze even seasoned fighters for a heartbeat. She held out her bloody hand toward Darius, silver runes already coiling around her wrist. "Final judgment is mine by blood challenge." Darius lunged again. Celeste met him with a burst of bond-forged force that hit like a hammer of light. His blade flew from his hand. Chain runes erupted from the oath stone and wrapped his arms, chest, and legs, slamming him to one knee against the pillar he had tried to manipulate. He thrashed, snarling, and the runes tightened until the stone itself hummed. She stood over him, breathing hard, voice steady. "You called me weak so I would kneel. Look at me standing." Spit flecked his lip as he glared up at her. "You were family. Family does not feed its daughters to wolves." Celeste turned to Senna and the elders. "Under blood law, I sentence him to exile mark, public stripping of name, and permanent severance from Stoneheart line." Senna rose, staff striking stone once. "Sentence acknowledged pending seal." Darius screamed and tore against the bindings with a sudden surge fed by panic and rage. One chain snapped, then another. He drove upward in a broken half-charge toward Celeste, hands clawed, murder plain. Lachlan moved faster than thought. He met Darius in sanctioned combat inside the circle boundary. One clean exchange, one disarm, one decisive strike to the throat and chest that dropped him to the stone. No spectacle, no mercy performance. Finality. Darius coughed once, blood dark at the corner of his mouth, eyes wild and disbelieving as the oath stone flared in response. "I would have ruled," he rasped. "She was supposed to bend." The stone pulsed, taking the confession. His gaze lost focus. His body went still. Silence rolled outward in heavy waves, broken only by Celeste's breathing and the hiss of torches in wet wind. Evo knelt to verify death, then stood and faced the assembly. "Darius Silvermane is dead in witnessed-sanctioned combat," he announced. "Confession recorded by oath stone. Claim extinguished." No one argued. Lachlan turned to Celeste, blood on his sleeve, chest rising hard, and waited for her signal before coming closer. She nodded once. He stepped to her side, not in front. Around them, elders began issuing orders at last aligned with truth. Seize Silvermane ledgers. Secure Grey Archive witnesses. Notify every pack that Regency claims were void pending formal transfer under Crown law. The night was still dangerous. The aftermath would be complex. But the central lie was dead on the stone where it had been built to rule. Celeste looked at Darius's body, then at the gathered packs, then at her own blood drying in the grooves of the oath stone. Her hand trembled. Her voice did not. "No more kneeling," she said. This time, the circle answered with bowed heads. The bowed heads were still lowering when Celeste turned to Senna and said, I request Moon Sanctuary privacy under widow right transition. Senna studied her for one long beat, then struck her staff once in assent. Granted. Only chosen witness may enter. Celeste looked at Lachlan. You. He nodded, but he did not move until she took the first step. The sanctuary sat above the main circle, carved into the cliff face where water ran in thin silver threads over black stone and vanished into a shallow basin. Moonlight poured through an open seam in the roof, pale enough to make the carved runes along the walls glow. By the time they entered, her legs were trembling from blood loss, adrenaline, and the weight of holding herself upright through too many public reckonings. Lachlan closed the door behind them and stopped several paces away. He looked enormous in the narrow chamber, blood drying on his sleeve, fury and reverence fighting for space in his expression. Tell me what you need, he said. Not what he wanted, not what fate demanded. What she needed. She set Rowan's signet on the lip of the basin, beside the cloth wrapped around the poisoned locket that Ivo had sent up for final claimant disposition. Past and trap, truth and betrayal, both laid where she could see them. Then she faced Lachlan fully. I need this chosen in a clear mind, she said. Not because we survived a fight. Not because the hall watched. I will not be rescued into another cage. His throat worked once. Then hear me clearly. If you walk out unmarked, I still stand beside you in every court, every border dispute, every birth cry. Bond or no bond. The tight knot behind her ribs loosened just enough for breath. And if I choose bond? Then I spend the rest of my life proving it was partnership, not possession. Her hand found her belly, where the child moved in one calm, deliberate roll. The bond between her and Lachlan hummed, patient and warm, no longer a violent shock, but a current waiting for consent to become structure. Come closer, she whispered. He crossed the space slowly. When he was within reach, he lifted his hand and paused at her jaw until she nodded. His palm settled against her cheek, calloused and careful. Say it once, he said, voice roughened by restraint. So no law, no elder, no ghost can claim uncertainty. Celeste held his gaze. I choose you. I choose this bond. I choose you as my mate. A broken, reverent sound escaped him. He bowed his head to her shoulder, inhaled, then looked up for final permission. She turned slightly, baring the junction of her neck and shoulder to moonlight. Do it, she said. His first bite was gentle, pressure and heat, and the clean sting of skin parting. Pain flashed bright, then transformed almost immediately, not into numbness, but into a spreading wave of warmth that moved through her chest, down her spine, and into the center of her body where fear had lived for months. At her small nod against his temple, he bit deeper, sealing the mark with a low growl that sounded less like dominance and more like relief, finally given voice. Light answered. Amber and silver spiraled from the point of contact, wrapping them both in thin, luminous threads that sank into skin and bone. Through the bond, she felt him all at once. Old guilt from choices made too late, nights spent carrying command like a wound, the exact moment he saw her kneeling in chains and decided he would burn custom before he let it happen twice. None of it polished, none of it hidden. She touched the mark on her shoulder, breath shuddering. Mine, she whispered, the word trembling and absolute. His forehead pressed to hers. Yours, he answered. Always. She slid her hand to his throat. My turn. His pupils widened. He tipped his head back without hesitation, exposing the strong line of his neck. Mate. Celeste leaned in and bit, deliberate and equal. The taste of him, the pulse beneath her mouth, the sharp sting in her own jaw, all of it fused with the bond's rising current. He exhaled hard, hands bracing at her waist but never tightening beyond what she welcomed. When she released, moonlight flared again, this time flowing both directions, and the mind link opened fully. She felt the child's heartbeat settle into a steady rhythm between them, as if the bond itself had become a cradle around 3 lives instead of 2. She felt Rowan's memory move through her without being erased, grief no longer a blade at her throat, but a scar held in honest light. She felt Lachlan receive that grief without jealousy, only fierce respect for what came before him. He kissed her brow, then her marked shoulder, and gathered her carefully into his arms. They stood that way for a long time, breathing in sync while the sanctuary water whispered over stone. When they finally parted enough to speak, Celeste nodded toward the basin. The locket goes to evidence fire, publicly. It will be done. The signet is entered into Stoneheart Archive as sworn proof, then returned to our household after birth. He touched the ring with 2 fingers in oath. Done. She met his eyes. Mara? A faint smile, tired and proud. Found at dawn in a safe house outside Lower Marsh. Evo brought her under guard. She is alive, angry, and asking for your breakfast tray to be less insulting. A breath of laughter broke from Celeste, wet with relief. Good. Gray archive update too, he added. Missing clerk recovered from a river shed before moonset. Memory scrape damage, but coherent enough for deposition. The clerk who looked away in your first hearing confessed he accepted Silvermane Mint and has been stripped of office. The elder who watched you like cargo tried to deny everything until Oathstone review. His silence is now entered as willful neglect, and Senna moved for permanent removal. No dangling shadows, no unnamed machinery left to hide behind. By first light, rain had cleared. In the central hall, Senna presided over the formal accord while every seated alpha stood to witness. Darius's body had been burned by law, his confession crystal lodged in the Oath Archive. The Silvermane crest was struck from Regency rolls. Wolfsbane supply logs from Stoneheart Keep matched the cuffs of the hunters who first shadowed Celeste, and those hunters were now in chains awaiting sentence. The forged petition, the poisoned locket mechanism, the assassin brands, and the altered ledgers were catalogued, sealed, and entered into Interpack record. Senna read the final decree aloud. Stoneheart lands are restored under Crown protection. Lady Celeste Stoneheart Bloodmoon is recognized as Luna Queen and appointed co-ruler of Interpack Justice, with independent claimant authority. No widow or child may be transferred by ritual submission henceforth. Every alpha present placed hand to heart in assent. None asked her to kneel. 3 weeks later, when frost silvered the fortress roofs, and the first quiet dawn in months broke without alarm bells, labor began for true. Celeste gripped Lachlan's hand hard enough to leave crescent marks, cursed him once, then laughed through tears when Mara told him to stop hovering and boil more water if he wanted to be useful. Hours folded into breath and effort, and the steady anchor of his voice at her shoulder. Their daughter arrived at sunset, furious, healthy, and loud enough to make the guards outside cheer. Lachlan held the child against his chest with shaking hands, then passed her to Celeste and pressed his marked throat to her temple. Mine, he murmured to both of them, awed and wrecked. Yours, Celeste whispered back, smiling through exhaustion. Mate. At the public claiming ceremony on the next full moon, she and Lachlan stood at the center of the same sacred circle where Darius had fallen. No chains, no forced posture. Their hands linked, eyes level, marks visible at shoulder and throat. Child cradled between them in a silver wrap stitched with Stoneheart black and Bloodmoon gray. Senna spoke the final blessing. Evo stood watch with quiet pride. Mara cried openly and did not apologize. When the assembly bowed, they bowed to both rulers. Celeste did not kneel. She never would again.